From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
We have a deal. Welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kailey Leinz in Washington alongside Bloomberg's Mike Shepard today. Joe Matthew is off on this day that we get the first post-Liberation Day trade agreement between the U.S. and a major trading partner. It's the U.K. first off the block here, though the details still have to be finalized. We'll get the latest with Bloomberg White House correspondent Josh Wingrove this hour, plus reaction from our political panel. Rick Davis and Adam Hodge are joining us today. And we have to get the latest from Capitol Hill as well, as the budget reconciliation process is still underway. But how much forward progress is really being made? Bloomberg's Mike Dorning will be here with the latest ahead of some key markups that have now been scheduled for next week. It's a lot ahead this hour, but we begin, as always, with a check on the markets, who seem to like what they're hearing in regard to trade. Amy Morris has a look from here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kailey, boy, do they ever. Stocks rose, bonds fell amid hopes that a U.S.-UK tariff pact could ease tensions and serve as a blueprint for President Trump's negotiations with other countries. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 1.3%. NASDAQ is up 1 3/4%. The Dow up 1.4%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.33%. And the 2-year yield at 3.86%. Now, President Trump announced the framework for a trade agreement with the UK, marking the first of his promised deals with countries around the world.
The deal includes billions of dollars of increased market access for American exports, especially in agriculture, dramatically increasing access for American beef, ethanol, and virtually all of the products produced by our great farmers.
The agreement includes a 10% baseline tariff and will focus on specific sectors. And Trump officials have discussed granting the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar a special fast-track status for deals that could smooth the way for billions in investments. Sources tell Bloomberg News that deliberations on reforming the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. are in the early stages. Fast-track status would help eliminate a major hurdle for Gulf sovereign wealth funds. Funds drew scrutiny from the Biden administration for their perceived close ties to China. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. It's Kailey Leinz and Michael Shepard today here on Balance of Power, which turned out to be a pretty busy morning or day here in Washington thus far, as the first agreement between the U.S. and a major trading partner after Liberation Day obviously unleashed a flurry of negotiating. It is not an Asian country like India or Japan or South Korea, as we might have thought, Mike. It's the UK that comes out first.
And you're right, Kailey. The direction of travel really had pointed to a different market, a different region of the global economy toward Asia. The administration has been touting progress with India, with Japan, with South Korea in their negotiations, which had really been far advanced, at least from the administration's telling and from signaling by those trading partners.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see the UK go first. And the other signal that also emerged was this relationship between Keir Starmer on speakerphone with the president and also with the UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, who, it's important to note, is a seasoned trade negotiator. And he no doubt had something to bring to the table here.
Yeah, and we should point out that while there is an agreement that has been made, it isn't necessarily signed, sealed, and delivered yet. There's still details, according to UK officials, that need to be ironed out here.
Well, right. And even the president acknowledged that there would be details ironed out in coming weeks. And of course, we've heard from him before 2 weeks. Who knows how long it will take to actually get those nailed down. There are a lot of constituencies at stake here. It's pharmaceuticals, it's autos in particular, and all of these industries have a lot of skin in the game, and they want to make sure that they don't come out on the short end in the fine print once it's actually put together.
Yeah, well, even if it's not fully put together yet, the president certainly was excited to announce this today, holding a big news conference inside the Oval Office. Here's part of how President Trump characterized this agreement.
In a historic step, the deal includes plans that will bring the United Kingdom into the economic security alignment with the United States. That's the first of its kind. So we have a big economic security blanket, and that's very important. And we feel very, very comfortable with that because it's been a great ally, truly one of our great allies. I mean, a lot of people say our greatest ally. I don't want to insult people by saying that, but I can say it's certainly one of our greatest.
And we do have some breaking news as well here on Bloomberg. The Cardinals, assembled in the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican in the aftermath of the death of Pope Francis, have elected a new pope. White smoke now rising from the Sistine Chapel. We'll bring you more details as we get them, remembering that the first vote last night resulted in black smoke emerging. A pope was not selected on that first day of the conclave, but once again, white smoke is now coming out of the Sistine Chapel. You can see a live view of Vatican City and Rome and that smoke permeating the air here if you're with us on YouTube. And again, we'll bring you more details on that as soon as we get them, but we want to return to this U.S.-UK trade agreement first. Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove, who covers the White House for us, is here with us in Washington, D.C. So, Josh, obviously this is a big deal, not just for the Trump administration, but for Keir Starmer and the United Kingdom as well. What actual firm details, though, do we know are finalized, and what details have been left out at this point?
A lot have been left out. I think what to call this, I think, is an open question. The term trade deal kind of conjures an FTA. This is not even in the same planetary orbit as an FTA. This is the term sheet, essentially. The deal here is the UK is rolling back tariffs on some industries, including ethanol and beef and other food products, agreeing also to buy Boeing planes. The US is creating what you might call a Rolls-Royce carve-out, $100,000 unit tariff quota, 10% tariffs on those autos. Above that, the regular 25% tariff. As well as some other measures, perhaps on steel and aluminum. That's very much still to be determined. The countries are singing sort of different tunes on that in the last hour or so. So it is quite targeted, I guess you might say, if you were trying to be generous on this. But this is a small bite of the apple, and I think we should be clear about it. I think there are also a couple other things you can take from this. Number one, that 10% global tariff. Yep. Looks like it's going to remain in effect. It remains in effect with the UK. They did not get that lowered. Trump in his press conference indicating that he considers that a floor. So some countries wanted to get below that, like Australia. Who's to say? There is potentially relief on the sectoral tariffs because of this quota on cars. Other countries, Japan and South Korea, no doubt will be seeking something similar. But look, Trump loves tariffs. This thing keeps in place tariffs. There are measures here, but it is not what he was seeking in his first term. It is not an FTA. It is more targeted, and I think it indicates his ongoing interest in just having some level of tariffs there, and his interest in wanting to strike a deal. But it's pretty narrow.
And Josh, there were some sectoral elements in this on autos, and then also on steel and aluminum. Talk about that a little bit, what we saw there, and whether that's a template for other negotiations with trading partners that also have key interests in those areas, thinking South Korea and Japan.
Yeah, and the Canadians perhaps watching that as well, other sort of like-minded countries that want basically in the fence when it comes to on steel and aluminum. The UK is saying that those tariffs are going to zero. The Americans are not saying that. The Americans are saying that there will be negotiations on it, but certainly they seem like they'll come down in exchange for the UK taking steps to stop transshipment. That means Chinese steel sort of touching base on its way to home plate and kind of going through third-party countries. And so that is the model. Other countries will look at that and say, look, if I crack down on China the way the U.S. wants, maybe I'll get some relief from those steel and aluminum tariffs. So, we'll see. But that is one of the ones that's subject to negotiation still. Other fine print as well to come on things like, it seems like beef as well.
You mentioned China. We also got a little news from the president on that regard ahead of Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent and the USTR Jamieson Greer heading to Geneva this weekend. When asked after yesterday saying no, he would not preemptively reduce the tariff rate on China to kind of ease these talks, he said if they go well, he might. But we've obviously heard a lot of back and forth.
Shout out to our colleague Anne Porter,
yes,
who had that question.
That is correct.
Yes, right. I think right now they are sending sort of, let's call it strategic ambiguity over these talks. One thing Trump did say is these will be more than just introductory talks. He wants them to get into substance. Secretary Bessent was standing sort of 3 rows back behind the press and said the same thing from off camera. And so I would, who's to say? Remember, Trump backed off on April 9th when the markets were nosediving and really ratcheted things up on China. He did it pretty quickly and had done it quickly in the week before that since his April 2nd Liberation Day announcement. It is completely possible that that pattern will continue and that he will unilaterally announce reductions as a good faith measure. So we'll see. But as you know, he said the opposite in the past as well. So, whether it's 145, which is the current combined rate right now, 20 for fentanyl, 125 for China, or a slightly lower number. Does that make all that much difference? I think a lot of importers would say that's trade embargo level numbers already, and it doesn't make a difference. You need to go well down. And so I think whether we're going to go well down from 145 is really an open question still.
Will the Chinese be expecting a significant lowering or pause in tariffs to even get conversations underway?
I think the indications are from our colleagues in the region that there would have to be a substantial change in that. What that number looks like remains unclear. Remember, the initial number on China was 34 plus the 20, so 54. Perhaps that, it's just unclear right now.
I'm keeping an eye on Vatican City, where white smoke has just emerged from the Sistine Chapel, signaling that the cardinals, more than 130 of them who had elected or gathered to elect a new pope, have indeed successfully done so. We're still awaiting more details, but that does put my eyes on Europe, Josh, which we heard from President Trump about as well, actually having some pretty kind words for Ursula von der Leyen, suggesting he would like to talk to her after having talked about Brexit and how the UK made the right decision leaving the EU. Does this deal with the UK ease the EU negotiations, or are these just two entirely separate entities, and there's so many other countries you have to consider with Europe that this isn't really a blueprint?
I guess maybe ask me in a couple hours when we've had a chance to make more calls, but I think that this is a modest deal with a friendly country that had relatively few complications. And so extrapolating from that to much bigger blocks with much more complex politics and thornier disputes, the difficulty factor ratchets up a little bit. So I don't think we can necessarily extrapolate very much.
And are we getting a sense of who might be next? Japan, South Korea?
India certainly was among there in the betting odds. The Japanese and South Koreans, the U.S. administration has spoken positively about it, but those are tricky ones, right? Cars are a big part of those economies, and Trump just simply does not want car imports at the level they've been. So I think we're waiting to see. There are also ongoing talks with other countries like Vietnam. And right now we're still trying to sort out what those lists are, Mike. They haven't said. Besson has talked about 18. They just haven't published that 18 list. So it's sort of eye of the beholder. It is currently Thursday. Tomorrow's 18 could be different. We'll see. But I think certainly the betting odds are India, Japan, South Korea had been sort of near the top of the list on that.
Well, and how talks with China go ultimately factor into those conversations as well, right? Because our reporting has indicated it's not just about the bilateral trade between these countries and the United States, but also how those countries interact or maybe enact barriers on China.
Right, and the U.S. has shifted its strategy a few times, or at least shifted how it's talking about it. And at times they've said, look, we want to rack up some quick wins to create pressure on China to come to the table. Well, China's at the table right now, so whether that sort of backburners some of those other countries, particularly those regional partners, India, Japan, South Korea, I think is an open question right now. But right now, I think Trump has sort of one ticking clock, that 90-day thing that comes off just after July 4th, when, of course, remember, House lawmakers wanted to sign his bill there on a big Independence Day celebration. So whether those tariffs on everyone but China snap up just after July 4th, we don't know yet, but that's the current deadline. China, no deadline. So I think we'll be looking for progress, of course, on those. And tiered approach, maybe. And I don't think everyone's just going to lay down their tariff weapons, overnight.
And there is only one Scott Bessent, and he is not only embroiled in the China negotiations, he is also helping lead the way with the discussions with leadership on Capitol Hill about that big, beautiful bill. How do we even get close to that timeline?
And in fact, Trump alluded to time crunches today because he said, look, I would have loved to work the phones for Ed Martin, but we're giving up on him as DC's top prosecutor after Tom Tillis, of course, indicated his opposition to it. So, there are bandwidth questions right now for sure. There are ongoing uncertainties in Congress about whether they can stick the landing on that big, beautiful bill.
On this kind of question of whether it's getting the tax package through or getting an announcement on a deal like this, Josh, how badly politically did the White House actually need for this to happen, knowing that there has been polling that suggests the public is not super confident in this tariff policy? Yes. Did he have to have something to show, hence the kind of all of a sudden, hey, we're making an announcement with the UK, press conference in the Oval Office, 10 a.m. tomorrow, that was announced yesterday? He
did want announcements. I think we're going to see continued investment announcements. Certainly everyone thinks that when he goes on his trip to Saudi Arabia and elsewhere that there'll be some kind of investment announcements around that. He wants to strike a positive story. He told people today to buy stocks. See, investors seem to be reacting to that.
Had some words for Chairman Powell as well.
Right, that's right. He always has words for Chairman Powell. Those of us who covered Donald Trump, I think we are blue in the face repeating this. He likes tariffs. He was asked today about the ports on the West Coast being empty, no one wanting to bring in goods. He said, good, we're not losing money then. So I think we need to just continue to reiterate that. I feel like I'm sorry for being a broken record. He likes tariffs. They're here to stay. More are coming. Remember those sectoral tariffs on semiconductor chips, lumber, pharmaceutical drugs, copper. Those are still in the hopper right now. We don't know what the timing would be or whether he might slow walk them with market sensitivities. But I do think, I don't want to call anyone out if they are expecting a great end to the tariff fights of our time. Trump is a believer in tariffs. It's just one of the most consistent things about what is occasionally not always an entirely consistent administration.
That's a nice way to characterize it. Josh Wingrove, who covers the White House for us and the Trump administration here at Bloomberg, thank you so much for joining us on one piece of breaking news that we're dealing with in Washington on this Thursday. The other piece of breaking news we're getting, though, comes from Rome, Vatican City in particular, where the conclave has successfully selected a new pope, signaled by white smoke rising from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. And we want to get more now as we keep an eye on Vatican City. You can see live shots if you're with us on YouTube with Zoe Schneeweiss. She is Bloomberg team leader for economics in Western Europe and is joining us now here on Balance of Power. Zoe, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, we are still awaiting the name of who the new pope actually will be that is succeeding the late Pope Francis. But this didn't take very long. The conclave only began yesterday.
Yes, this is incredibly quick. Overall, if we go back to the last time we had a situation like this, it takes about an hour between the white smoke rising and us and all of us actually getting a name. But obviously, it's one of those hours where then all of us are in overdrive. A reminder that there are 133 electors in this conclave, so there are a lot more bishops. But you only can be an elector until you're 80. You stop being an elector once you reach that age. So, and there's a huge array here of potential candidates, although it's being decided so quickly, looks like it might be one of those favorites.
Zoe, this is Mike Shepard. Question about the vote and the speed and whether that is a signal by cardinals that they want to demonstrate unity within the church. What have you been hearing as you've been reporting on this?
That would be a good guess here. That a quick decision, obviously, it means that the new pope can be in office as quickly as possible, and that more eyes are on this conclave than ever before. If you just consider how the last time we had one of these, we didn't yet have we weren't yet watching from mobile phones. So really, just what that stream of watching the smoke and the chimney had more followers than ever. So it is one of those where people generally get motivated and get inspired by something like this, and finding out Francis was much beloved, and finding a new pope as quickly as possible will motivate people will motivate Christians around the world to again turn to the church in times of need.
Well, and as we consider the legacy of the late Pope Francis, Zoe, he obviously was seen as a more progressive pope and kind of taking the church in a bit of a different direction than it had been going under his predecessor. To what extent does this election, this decision of who the next pope will be, ultimately dictate the future of the Catholic Church and whether or not it will be in kind of keeping with Francis's legacy, continuing kind of a more liberal progressive view or going back more traditionalist, if you will?
Exactly. Those are those two big streams that we should be seeing here. Would it be a continuity candidate, again, someone progressive, or will we go back to someone more conservative? The other thing to keep in mind here is that there could be a massive demographic shift here, or just a massive shift. If for the first time here, we could have a pope from Africa or Asia. So those would be things there where potentially then, irrespective if are African or Asian candidates, then are progressive or are conservative, that might just bring this whole new impetus to the Vatican and to its policy.
And Zoe, how soon has the Vatican indicated that it might actually reveal the name? We're seeing the images of throngs of people in St. Peter's Square eagerly awaiting the news about who this person is. And you described the stakes so eloquently there. But what is the timing for the Vatican to actually tell the world?
Unfortunately, it has no fixed timing. If we go from past instances, it normally takes about an hour. There's this whole ritual between them deciding on the Pope. They have to change clothes, all these things. So there'll be a few steps there. We are hoping about an hour, but again, it's obviously this person's biggest, I'm losing my way. Sorry. It's a big move for this person. So obviously you go out and you speak to the people then. So you want to kind of get to grips with this. So I think a few minutes, fewer, more or less, won't really make a difference.
All right, Zoe, we really appreciate you joining us on this breaking news. Again, the conclave has elected a new pope. White smoke has risen from the Sistine Chapel. We're just waiting whether it's an hour or longer to find out who it actually is. Zoe Schneeweiss, our colleague in Western Europe, joining us here on Balance of Power. Thank you so much. And we want to add another voice to this conversation now and turn to Megan Clark. She is professor of moral theology at St. John's University. Professor, thank you for your time. Obviously, we are working with a limited amount of detail here, but just knowing that the conclave only assembled yesterday and already a selection of the new pope has been made. It only took a few rounds of voting. What does that signal to you?
I think it signals that the cardinals have a kind of more of a sense together of where they want to see the church going. And we've seen that in the past couple. Pope Francis was elected on the second day, Pope Benedict XVI on the second day, John Paul I. And so it's not uncommon, but I think it is a sign that that maybe kind of the drama that we saw might be happening in beforehand maybe wasn't so great. The divisions unifies them is stronger than disagreements.
And when it comes to that question of unity in terms of bringing together the more liberal wing of the church that Pope Francis really espoused and other more conservative elements of the church that his predecessor, Pope Benedict, embodied, what does this vote tell us about bringing them together and then what the direction of travel will be for the church going forward?
At this point, all we know is that we have a pope. And I got to say, as a Catholic and as a theologian, I sat there and I saw the white smoke and started to cry. What we will learn in the next couple of hours is we'll be able to tell a lot from not just who it is, but when that announcement happens and he walks out, what name has he chosen? Is he wearing all white the way Pope Francis was, or is he in the kind of the traditional red overlay over the white? These will give us some signs as to how the new pope is thinking of his role and the church for the future. But at this point, all we really know is that we have a pope.
Yeah, and as you talk to us about your reaction, Megan, we've seen the reaction on the faces of those who are gathered in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. We're seeing live views still on YouTube here. Obviously, this is a massive moment, not for all of those individuals, but for the more than 1 billion Catholics around the world. And when we consider the kind of global reach of the church, knowing there is potential here for a demographic and a pope to be touched that we haven't seen before, how important is that, the representation here?
I think that what we've really seen over the last 2 weeks as everyone came together to mourn Pope Francis, as the cardinals all came to Rome and as the conclave began, is I think we really did see global Catholicism in a way that we never had before in this moment. And that's because of the way that Pope Francis prioritized that we are a global church and that the men who are in that role of leadership and that select the Pope should represent the global church. So whether our new Pope is Italian or European or from the global South, what is really remarkable is that there were 71 countries represented in that room, voices from every corner of Catholicism in who, selected him and put their trust and the future of the church in his hands.
We've talked about the views globally of the incoming pontiff, but how have American Catholics looked toward this change in leadership at the Vatican specifically? Are they looking for something different in the new leader of the church?
I think that American Catholics, like Americans in general, are kind of a very wide-ranging group of people. I think there are some who are hoping for a change. I know that as someone who teaches young adults, I know that what I see and hear from my students and those I've taught is a real deep sense of they felt seen and cared about on a personal level by Pope Francis. And so I think that myself, like my students, are really hoping that there can be that kind of sense of intimacy and communication and real listening and love that comes from the next Pope too.
Well, we don't know who that will be yet. We still have our eyes here live on a shot of Vatican City after the white smoke emerged from the Sistine Chapel. A marching band is playing. We are seeing a lot of flags and people celebrating an incredible moment in history, to be sure. Megan, we thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the time joining us from St. John's University, where she is a professor. Megan Clark, professor of moral theology at St. John's University. Thank you so much. And we want to return to the other breaking news story we're following today, and that is a U.S.-UK trade agreement that was announced at the White House by President Trump earlier today. And one of the clear components of that agreement, while some details are still being ironed out, is when it comes to autos, 100,000 vehicle quota of the tariff at 10% rather than over 27%. And on that note, we turn to our colleague Craig Trudell, who leads our global auto coverage from London. Craig, can you just walk us through how significant that development with autos in particular is in this agreement between the U.S. and the U.K.?
It's really important for UK car makers because the US market is really important for them. You mentioned the 100,000 vehicle quota. That's basically bang on what the volume was of vehicles imported from the UK by the US last year. It was just under 97,000 vehicles. But I would point out too that it was only just a few years ago, before the pandemic, that the UK was shipping in more than twice that so more than 200,000 cars. And so one of the things that was interesting, just in the sort of comments that Starmer and Trump were making this afternoon, my time here in London, is that that quota is not necessarily fixed, at least according to Prime Minister Starmer. And so to what extent that ends up moving a little bit to give UK manufacturers a higher ceiling is something that we'll be watching. And while we've seen the tariff rate come down from 27.5% to 10%, I will point out too that before all this, the duty was 2.5%, and so it's a victory if you're a company like Land Rover, but kind of a partial one.
Craig, we're also seeing the president try to negotiate deals with the rest of the world, not just the UK, and a number of those key trading partners, including Japan, South Korea, and the European Union, export a lot of vehicles to the U.S. What does this signal to those trading partners about what they might be able to get from the Trump administration as they try to bring those deals home?
Yeah, I think it's really important, just the to sort of put all of this into some perspective. I mean, in terms of the amount of trade that the UK does, with the U.S. from a car's perspective, it is important for UK companies, but it is also sort of number 6 on the pecking order. So you have Mexico and Canada, Japan, Korea, Germany, these countries are far ahead of the UK, and it is important for those countries too that these 25% tariffs on cars come back down in the direction of where they were before.
All right, Craig Trudeau, Bloomberg Autos editor, joining us from London. Thank you so much for your time as we keep an eye here on Vatican City. As the Cardinals have elected a new pope, we'll continue to follow that story and much more from here in Washington on Balance of Power. Alongside Michael Shepard today, I'm Kailey Leinz, and we'll have more just ahead here on Bloomberg Radio.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. President Trump announcing a trade framework with the UK, bringing down barriers and expanding market access for American imports.
This morning, I'm thrilled to announce that we've reached a breakthrough trade deal with the United Kingdom. Incredible country. Today is a victory day for World War II. We won the war together exactly 80 years ago, so there could be no more perfect morning to reach this historic agreement.
The pact is limited in scope. It keeps a 10% baseline tariff and allows UK manufacturers to send 100,000 cars into the U.S. under a 10% tariff. It also fast-tracks U.S. goods through UK customs and reduces barriers on some exports. And the markets love this. We check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. S&P 500 up 1.4%, NASDAQ up 1.8%, the Dow up 1.4%, the 10-year Treasury yield at 4.34%, the 2-year yield at 3.88%. Francis Donald at RBC is not expecting any clarity, though, on the economy as a whole until later this year.
The data right now is still reasonably okay. The problem is, where is it going next? And the balance of risks is towards higher inflation and higher unemployment.
Francis Donald at RBC. And yes, white smoke billowing out of the Sistine Chapel, indicating cardinals have elected a new leader of the Roman Catholic Church. We do await an announcement on the Pope from the Vatican. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now we go back to Balance of Power with Kailey Leinz and Michael Shepard.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you very much indeed. Yes, Michael Shepard is in for Joe Matthew on this day, which is turning out to be pretty historic for a number of reasons. As Amy mentioned, we do have a new pope. We don't know who it is yet or what name they will choose, but we have seen white smoke emerge from the Sistine Chapel and are keeping a live eye on Vatican City and St. Peter's Square in Rome. You can see that on YouTube if that's where you are joining us today. But of course, the other story we're following came from the White House, the U.S. and the UK, announcing a trade framework, shall we say, not completely an ironed and inked agreement, but the president's still touting that as the first major trade deal since his Liberation Day announcement earlier this month. Also taking the opportunity to talk about a deal he hopes will be stricken in the coming weeks, not just with trading partners, but also in Congress to advance his budget reconciliation package, which of course will include what he's describing as the biggest tax cuts in history, even bigger than 2017. But Mike, we know that there's a lot of work that in the House specifically they still have to do to figure out just what spending cuts they're going to make to pay for those tax cuts and what that tax package ultimately looks like, including what happens to the SALT cap.
Well, there are so many needs to satisfy. The needs of fiscal hawks in particular, who yesterday made their concerns clear, who said that, look, if we don't get as much as $2 trillion in savings, we are going to have to dial back, Kailey, the amount of tax cuts in the final package. So there is a lot at stake, but also a lot of moving parts. It's not just SALT, it's also Medicaid.
Very good point. So let's get into all of that with Mike Dorning, who helps lead our coverage of Capitol Hill on our Capital Influence team here at Bloomberg in Washington. So, Mike, we know they've scheduled markups that were initially supposed to happen this week for next Tuesday. Does that signal progress, or are they just trying to set themselves a deadline to meet the Speaker's Memorial Day ambitions here?
I think they're just trying to keep the pressure on, keep trying to get that done. I mean, basically, the real deadline is December 31st. If they come anywhere close to the Speaker's deadline, they're doing it way early. And these are tough decisions, tough compromises, and they're just keeping people's feet to the fire, trying to force them to compromise, get to their bottom lines as soon as possible.
Mike, when it comes to SALT, which is, of course, of keen interest to our audience and to the higher tax regions like New York, New Jersey, in inner counties of Washington, D.C. What are we seeing there? There was a proposal, at least being floated, to raise the cap to up to $30,000 from the current level, but that comes with some cost and perhaps some objections from lawmakers in other regions.
Yeah, and also Speaker Johnson just kind of floated that today. Well, how about a $30,000 cap? And Nick Lota said, hey, that's not good enough. That's not going to pass. So right there, you've got an example of something where the fiscal hawks are saying $30,000. No way are we going to raise the cap to $30,000. And the New York, New Jersey, California lawmakers saying that's not enough. You need to raise them more. And the big difference is in 2017, they could just tell those New York, New Jersey, California Republicans, we don't need you. You can just go do whatever. We're going to just cap it at 10K. You can vote against it. We don't care. This time, they need those votes. This time, they only have a few votes to spare. They got to keep the fiscal hawks on board. They got to keep the New York lawmakers on board. They have to keep the people who want to preserve Medicaid on board. Everybody has to stay on board. It's tougher.
Well, so who has the leverage then? Because for the kind of SALT caucus people, if you will, if they don't renew the 2017 tax cuts, there is no cap on SALT. So what incentive do they have to agree to one in the first place versus more fiscally conservative folks who may be getting phone calls from President Trump saying, look, you got to get on board with this?
So it's a difficult, obviously, the moderates have more leverage in a way on this than the fiscal conservatives, because the fiscal conservatives really want the tax cuts. But then there are other calculations, like some of the vulnerable Republican lawmakers really want to run for governor because they feel like they're probably not going to get reelected to their House seat. And then you have to balance getting something for the people of New York, New Jersey, if you're running for one of those two states. But you don't want Trump to be too mad at you, because if you're running in a statewide primary, you need the president's help to get through that. So they face their own cross pressures, and the fiscal conservatives all represent districts where they're probably going to get reelected even if the tax cut doesn't pass. They're in safe seats, so they can take a hard one.
Mike, one area that conservatives have highlighted as a potential source of savings to support the tax cuts has been Medicaid. And yet, of course, we're seeing objections from Chuck Schumer, who was on Balance of Power earlier this week outlining his concerns. But we've also seen some Republicans also express their reservations.
A lot of vulnerable Republicans do have reservations about something that would force too many beneficiaries to lose benefits. So they're trying to work on things that are acceptable to politically vulnerable members. And also a lot of red state district residents rely on Medicaid for health coverage. There's, depending on the estimates, 72 million, 80 million Americans on Medicaid. So if you throw a lot of people off that, not only are you hurting those people, you're hurting rural hospitals, which rely heavily on Medicaid to stay in business. You're hurting economies there. So there's a balance to be struck there, but it's a lot of money that you could save by curbing Medicaid.
All right, Mike Dorning, thank you so much. Keeping an eye on this ever-evolving story on Capitol Hill for us. We appreciate it, and we want to turn now and get more from our political panel. Rick Davis is with us, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Adam Hodge, who's managing director at Bully Pulpit International. Welcome to you both, as we're still keeping an eye here on Vatican City, awaiting the news of who exactly the Pope the conclave has just elected actually is. We focus on Capitol Hill, and Rick, when we consider this question still remaining about whether or not they're willing to cut Medicaid substantially, questions remaining on SALT, how likely is it in your mind that we end up with a package that is nowhere near as big and beautiful as President Trump has suggested it will be, either because there aren't adequate spending cuts or there isn't as many tax cuts as he would like to see because there aren't adequate spending cuts?
Yeah, Kailey, this has been the topic of Republicans in the Senate who gathered at the this week to discuss just how are they going to try and fashion this bill with all the pressures, that are on them from both the spending side but also the revenue side, and they're all echoing the same thing, which is, gosh, we should have stuck to the Thune plan, gotten the tax cuts, gotten the defense spending, gotten the border bill, and then dealt with some of these other exigent issues. So too late for that, but the fashioning of this bill is going to have to be art, not science. Science would say, I've got certain things that each member is going to need for their reelection. We're going to buy them in and fashion a bill that's sort of tacked together. And frankly, that bill could be even bigger than the big, beautiful bill, because you're going to have to give away so much. But you can't do that and then hold on the spending side. So it's really going to be difficult by now, forget Memorial Day, to get to the 4th of July with even the confines of a bill that is going to be supported by all these Republicans, especially the divergent group within the House, is going to be near impossible at this stage. So the bill we think we're going to see is probably not the bill that's going to get a floor vote.
Adam, how is this taking shape from the Democratic perspective? We saw Chuck Schumer earlier this week on our airwaves talk about his concerns over Medicaid and the potential threat of cuts to that program. Does this tee up a good talking point for the party coming into 2026?
It does, and it's a familiar playbook. Rick and everybody can remember back in 2006, when the Bush administration talked about privatizing Social Security, Democrats were flailing a bit. They were able to hone on to this message about the Republican attempts to cut Social Security, and you will see the same playbook this time around, and it's been proven to be effective. That's why some of the Republican members in the Senate and in the House are already balking at the price tag. I mean, Don Bacon in Nebraska put down a marker for $500 million in Medicaid cuts, because I think they know that a lot of these cuts are deeply unpopular with their voters, and it certainly opens up a number of these swing district Republicans, while there may be fewer of them these days, who really would be in jeopardy if there were massive cuts to Medicaid. And then the Democrats are going to hammer that every day until Election Day for the next 15 months.
So as we consider what this ultimately looks like, how the votes will be counted, if the votes are there at all, I also want to ask you, Rick, about the votes that evidently were not there for Trump's original pick to be Surgeon General, as well as the top prosecutor, federal prosecutor in D.C. He said today he's pulling Ed Martin's nomination, who's been acting as the D.C. prosecutor in that role. Not clear who he's going to replace him with, but he also replaced his original Surgeon General nominee with Casey Means yesterday. And I wonder what that signals to you after the Senate, by and large, Matt Gaetz aside, was willing to choke down every other nominee he put forward. What was different about these two?
Well, I think getting your cabinet through is usually a loyalty test more than an experience test. And we saw that happen. There were votes traded for the importance of Trump getting his cabinet versus how well positioned, educated, experienced they are in the field that they were getting appointed. So that trade-off definitely went to loyalty to Trump. I think that's shifted to experience matters now, and these are much more functional jobs. Not that there's anything disparaging about being a cabinet secretary, but they're general managers and spokespeople, at least in the Trump construct. And these folks actually have a job that requires a lot of focus on details and technology in some cases, but also in this case the law. And all of a sudden, the experience in that area is really, really critical. And so these are not the level of jobs that Donald Trump's going to go to the mat for. If he did, he'd probably get them. But right now, the administration is trading these kind of job-related issues to what we were just talking about, which is they're going to break their pick on this big, beautiful bill. They do not need to be muscling a bunch of senators around right now, just to get marginal picks through the Senate confirmation process.
Adam, we also got. I was going to ask Adam about the trade deal, actually, because that was the other big piece of news today on the from the White House. We heard the president talking about his big, beautiful reconciliation bill, but that was in the context of the event where he announced an agreement on trade with the United Kingdom, the first he has forged since taking office and since launching a trade war against the world. What are you making of this, and how does it set the stage for negotiations with other American trading partners?
Yeah, no, look, we got some white smoke out of the White House today, too, on the trade front, in addition to what we got at the Vatican. I think it's no surprise that the UK was the first out of the gate here. Remember, the Trump administration was spent a lot of time negotiating a potential free trade agreement with the UK in his first term. They didn't get it across the finish line. In the Biden administration, we tried to take a little bit of a different approach to that relationship. And so it's no surprise that coming back to, like, they had the bones of an agreement that they could lean on for this initial agreement. But I want to make clear, this is a framework. There's still going to be more negotiations. The devil's always in the details with these agreements. And it remains to be seen whether this is the kind of like bigger package that ultimately has to get put up for a vote by the U.S. Congress. And that, if there are major changes on tariffs, I think that's the type of thing where Congress gets involved, and it raises the doubts about whether it actually gets across the finish line in a sort of a bigger trade agreement. Not going to stop the White House from the pageantry and having a deal, and they need it to try to help calm the markets, and you're seeing some of that reaction today.
Well, Adam, you talked about how they need this in the moment. During the announcement, the president signaled that it would be coming weeks. Is that an optimistic timeline, given all the fine print that needs to be typed out?
I mean, I never want to, cast doubt on the skills of my former colleagues at USTR, but that's tough. It may be a month, 6 weeks before they get the final details nailed down. And I think that when you're talking about, agriculture or steel and aluminum tariffs, I mean, those are all really sticky issues, and the language with how those goods are imported really, really matters, because you're talking about, moving billions and billions of dollars of goods. And so people want to make sure that they are ironclad. So that's where I think you'll see this take some time to get across the finish line. I do want to, though, take a step back lastly and just make the point. We're still going to have 10% tariffs across the board with the UK, which is still pretty high for what we are with the economy. So as much as this is progress on certain issues, it does raise the floor, and that ultimately will raise costs on the bulk of goods between the US and the UK.
And Rick, in our final minute here, keeping in mind the timing of this, announcing this deal before it is fully signed, sealed, and delivered, completely ironed out, what does that signal to you about how eager the Trump administration was to have something tangible to show for its post-Liberation Day negotiations?
I think Donald Trump's been watching the consumer sentiment. I think he's been seeing the economy, and I think he realizes that in order to continue to grow the economy and not have GDP go in the negative, he's got to start getting some momentum. And this was a good momentum play, right? I mean, he obviously got that out in the public with the cooperation of Prime Minister Starmer quicker than any trade deal that anybody can imagine doing. And of course, yes, all these details need to be dealt with. But this was a PR stunt, and it worked. Markets reacted very positively. Kudos to Ambassador Mandelson, experienced trade negotiator. This deal wouldn't have happened without him there. Starmer was not a Trump favorite. Boris Johnson couldn't get it done, who was a Trump favorite in his first term. This is a pretty smart UK team.
All right, Rick Davis and Adam Hodge, our political panel on this Thursday. Thank you both so much for joining us as we follow the news on trade, but also the news out of Rome. As we have a live shot, if you're with us on YouTube, you can see live images of Vatican City in the aftermath of the white smoke emerging from the Sistine Chapel. The cardinals All 133 of them have elected a new pope, and we are keeping an eye on the balcony at Vatican City of St. Peter's Basilica to see who that new pope will be, and ultimately, Mike, what name he chooses and what that might signal about the future of the Catholic Church.
There is so much symbolism in the decisions that the pope makes, the new pope makes, about his name, but also what he wears. You'll remember that Pope Francis rejected the red shoes and instead wore something just very plain. So we'll be looking to see what that is.
All right, and we will keep an eye on Vatican City, and we have much more ahead on this in our next hour of Balance of Power, which will begin right now with eyes on Washington and also on Rome. Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kailey Leinz in Washington alongside Bloomberg's Michael Shepard. Joe Matthew is off today as we are witnessing history and Rome. Our eyes on Vatican City after the Cardinals, who began their conclave only yesterday to elect the successor of the late Pope Francis, have indeed chosen the next pope. The name still unknown. We are awaiting the new pope to emerge from the balcony, but a moment in history that we are keeping an eye on here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And Mike, considering that the conclave was relatively short in duration, again, the 133 cardinals participating only assembling yesterday for the first day of that conclave, and already they have made the selection of the next pontiff. We're just waiting to see who ultimately that person is and what they signal about the future direction of the Catholic Church.
Well, that's right. And for the church's 1.4 billion members globally, there is a lot at stake. They are wanting to know what direction the Catholic Church will be heading. Will it stay on the course that Pope Francis set, a more liberal one, a much more progressive one, or will it move back toward what we saw under his predecessor, Pope Benedict, one that was much more tradition-bound and much more conservative? And there are different elements and strands within the church that are pulling in different directions. So the fact that the cardinals were able to meet, the 133 in the conclave, in the College of Cardinals, were able to meet and reach this decision so quickly signals that they want at least a show of unity and that there is an overwhelming favorite in their midst.
Well, and as we await who that favorite ultimately is, we turn to Chiara Albanese, Bloomberg's Rome bureau chief, who is joining us now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Chiara, obviously the white smoke emerged just within the last hour. We were told that it could take roughly an hour for the new pope to actually emerge. Do we have any sense of how much closer we are getting to the moment where they will speak in Latin from the balcony and introduce the new pope, and we understand who that person is and what name they have chosen?
Well, it could be literally any second that we have the Habemus Papam, but the more time that it will take could actually signal that they are preparing the Pope, that he will have his own mark also already in the first appearance he will make from St. Peter's. Everyone is guessing who the person will be. Clearly, the fact that the conclave was quite short is telling us that one of the favorites, one of the names that we've become a bit more familiar with in the last few days, is likely to appear from the balcony.
Chiara, we're watching images of throngs gathered in St. Peter's Square, awaiting those words that you described to announce a new pope, Habemus Papam. But what is the mood and what has it been since Pope Francis's death and now as we await a successor?
This conclave and also Pope Francis' death and the days that followed have been definitely felt very dearly across Rome. It is the Jubileum year, so a lot of pilgrims and tourists already were planning to be in the Eternal City, and that only kind of attracted more crowds. St. Peter has been filled with pilgrims and believers and faithfuls, but also with tourists and just curious and Romans that thought about playing a part and witnessing with their own eyes what is happening in those days, and literally is history in the making.
Well, it certainly is, and history still to be made as the church moves forward into the future. Chiara, of the candidates we understand that maybe were highest ranking in the minds of the cardinals, if you will, the ones who were understood to be favorites, how differently in terms of direction could they take the Catholic Church depending on who was chosen, knowing that they are succeeding a pope who was seen as much more liberal and progressive than those who had come before him?
Yes, a lot is at stake here because the Pope Francis was a very specific figure, but also he was loved, but also not by everyone. So the name that will come out of the balcony will tell us a lot and will impact not only the Catholic Church, but also a lot of like geopolitics and diplomacy and what is going on around the world. So we should expect really a big and deep impact by the decision that has been made today in the Sistine Chapel.
Chiara, what are some of the most divisive issues that the new pontiff will have to confront as he takes this new office?
Well, there are definitely some issues that have been divisive in the Catholic Church for ages, which is the role of women and also the approach to social rights, to LGBTQ faithful, but also how to approach and how much the church should be involved in conflicts, for example, in Gaza, Israel, and what is happening in Russia and Ukraine. We have some candidates, for example, Parolin, that have been as background some diplomatics, and they have been involved already in trying to become players in the geopolitical arena. So those are also issues that are going to be impacted by the decision.
Well, and I also wonder what's going to happen just inside the Vatican. As we know, Pope Francis, while being much less favored of the pomp and circumstance in both his life and, frankly, his death, with the changes we saw him making to the traditional funeral proceedings in the aftermath of his passing, Chiara, how is the infrastructure of the Vatican itself and the changes he made different than before he became the Pope? And do we expect to see that with whoever his successor ultimately is, or could we see a reversion back to what was previously normal?
Well, the church is an institution that is as traditional as progressive at the same time. So under Pope Francis, a lot has been done in terms of cleaning up, for example, the finances and also the image. It's quite surprising, for example, how this conclave was very neatly run also in terms of media, communication. It has all worked really well. Rome has supported and survived very well to the floods of tourists and people that arrived. So we should expect also to have the Catholic Church evolving into the next century really, really well and continue to do so, even under the next Pope.
And what can we expect in terms of that demographic shift we were just talking about in access to regions that have not been represented as well? And we're thinking of places like Haiti and Bangladesh that now have representation in the college. How much influence will they start to wield?
Well, if we will have a pope that is not Italian and that will be from Asia or Africa, that will also tell a lot in terms of like how much the demography of those continents is weighing on the church itself. And we have a lot of candidates that have been touted as potential popes that are coming from those regions. So definitely this is going to be, the geographical argument, the new pope is going to be a crucial element in the assessment we're going to make in the coming days and hours.
All right, Chiara Albanese joining us from Rome, where she is our bureau chief here at Bloomberg. Thank you so much. Again, we're keeping a live eye on Vatican City here on Bloomberg TV and our ears on it as well on Bloomberg Radio.